There is a version of the 1970s and 1980s that gets told a lot. The excess, the stadium tours, the hotel rooms, the mythology of rock and roll as the great rebellion against everything stable and responsible and grounded. That version is not entirely wrong, but it is profoundly incomplete. Because running alongside all of that mythology was something that does not fit the narrative as neatly. A very large number of the men and women who built classic rock into the global phenomenon it became were also quietly or loudly deeply connected to firearms culture. They hunted, they collected, they shot for sport, they carried, and the guitars and the guns existed in the same lives without contradiction. Because in the world a lot of these artists came from, that was simply normal. This video is about the classic rock era, the AC/DC and Guns N' Roses and Black Sabbath generation. The artist whose music was the soundtrack to a particular American and British working class experience that had no trouble holding a guitar in one hand and a rifle in the other. These are not the polished pop stars who pose with firearms for shock value in a music video. These are artists whose relationship with guns runs deeper than their public personas, who came from places where firearms were part of life before they were ever part of a stage show, and whose collections and shooting habits tell a story about who they really are when the tour bus stops. Slash, the guitarist whose top hat and Les Paul have made him one of the most recognizable musicians alive, is also a man with a serious and long-standing relationship with firearms that most of his fans have no idea about. Born Saul Hudson in Hampstead, London, and raised in Los Angeles, Slash developed his connection to American firearms culture through the particular world of Los Angeles rock in the 1980s. A world that was simultaneously glamorous and dangerous, and deeply connected to American working class roots through the transplanted Midwestern and Southern families who made up a significant portion of its population. Slash's collection is extensive and eclectic, reflecting both the aesthetic sensibilities of a man whose entire artistic identity is built around visual impact and the practical knowledge of someone who has spent real time at the range. His preference for classic American handgun platforms, particularly the Colt 1911 in various configurations, reflects an appreciation for design that has been refined over decades into something close to perfect. The 1911, like the Les Paul guitar that Slash has made his signature, is a classic American design that every subsequent development has been measured against and found wanting in certain respects. The parallel is not accidental. Both instruments reward serious investment in technique with a level of performance that more modern alternatives often cannot match. Slash has also been associated with the Remington 870 shotgun, the most successful pump-action shotgun in American history, which has been in continuous production since 1950, and which occupies in the shotgun world roughly the same position that the 1911 occupies in the handgun world. Proven, reliable, endlessly configurable, and available in every configuration from field gun to home defense platform. In the hands of someone who has put rounds through one seriously, the 870 is a deeply satisfying tool, and Slash's relationship with it reflects the same preference for time-tested excellence that runs through every aspect of his musical identity. Axl Rose presents a more complicated portrait, because Rose's relationship with practically everything in his life has always been complicated. But the guns were real, and they were present throughout the Guns N' Roses years in ways that went beyond rock and roll posturing. Rose grew up in Lafayette, Indiana, in circumstances that gave him a direct, unromantic understanding of why personal safety matters and what the tools of personal safety look like. His collection during the peak Guns N' Roses years was documented extensively by people who spent time in his orbit, and it reflected both the excess of the era and a genuine underlying seriousness about the weapons themselves. The Desert Eagle appears in Rose's orbit as it appears in the orbit of anyone who inhabits the intersection of entertainment wealth and firearms enthusiasm. Because the Desert Eagle is the most visually dramatic production handgun in existence, and it appeals powerfully to people who think visually. But more practically, Rose's connection to the AR-15 platform reflects something more substantive. The AR-15 was becoming the most popular centerfire rifle in America during exactly the years when Rose was at the height of his fame, and his relationship with it was that of a man who had grown up in the Midwest, where the rifle was a familiar presence, and who had the resources as an adult to pursue that familiarity seriously. Tony Iommi is the man most historians credit with inventing heavy metal. The guitarist whose down-tuned, distorted, doom-laden riff style on the early Black Sabbath records created an entirely new musical language. Iommi grew up in Aston, Birmingham, the son of an Italian immigrant father in a working-class English neighborhood where his path to guitar was shaped by the same grinding industrial landscape that shaped the music he would eventually make. His relationship with firearms is rooted in that background and in the hunting tradition that has always been part of rural British and European life, even if it differs significantly from the American tradition. Iommi has been a consistent and serious shotgun shooter throughout his adult life, with a particular appreciation for the classic British side-by-side shotgun tradition represented by makers like Purdy and Holland & Holland. These are not the utilitarian American firearms of a Remington or a Winchester. They are hand-fitted, bespoke instruments built to the specific dimensions of their owner, with case-hardened receivers and walnut stocks that represent the absolute peak of the gunmaker's craft. That the man who created some of the heaviest, most brutal music in history has a parallel passion for the most refined and elegant expression of the gunmaker's art is one of those contradictions that turns out, on reflection, to be perfectly coherent. Brian Johnson, the voice of AC/DC since 1980, and the man who delivered the vocal performances on Back in Black, one of the best-selling albums in human history, is also a serious shooter and a man with a deep appreciation for the craftsmanship that goes into a fine firearm. Johnson grew up in Dunston, Gateshead, in the northeast of England, and his working-class background is as central to his identity as his voice. His firearms interests reflect both the British shooting tradition and the American gun culture he has absorbed through decades of touring and living in the United States. Johnson has spoken about his appreciation for the classic bolt-action hunting rifle tradition, and specifically about the Mauser 98 Action, the German bolt-action design that became the basis for virtually every serious hunting rifle produced in the 20th century, including the Winchester Model 70 and the Remington 700. The Mauser 98 is to bolt-action rifle design what the 1911 is to semi-automatic pistol design, the foundational achievement that every subsequent development has built upon. That Brian Johnson, a man who has spent his career studying and appreciating craft at the highest level, has an eye for that kind of foundational excellence is entirely in keeping with who he is. Duff McKagan, the Guns N' Roses bassist who has reinvented himself multiple times over the course of a remarkable career, and who is one of the most intellectually engaged figures in rock music, brings a Seattle perspective to this conversation that reflects both the Pacific Northwest outdoor tradition and a thoughtful, evolved relationship with firearms that has been shaped by recovery, by parenthood, and by the genuine consideration of what responsible ownership means. McKagan has written extensively about his relationship with firearms, about the hunting trips that became important to him as part of a sober life grounded in physical experience and natural beauty, and about the Weatherby bolt-action rifles that he uses for that hunting. The Weatherby Mark V represents a different point on the quality spectrum from the utilitarian working rifles of the American hunting tradition. Roy Weatherby built his company on the premise that American hunters deserved a rifle that matched the ambition of the game they pursued. And the Mark V, with its distinctive 9-lug bolt and its proprietary high-velocity cartridges, delivers performance that standard factory rifles cannot approach. That McKagan uses one reflects both genuine shooting seriousness and the preference for excellence that characterizes everything he does. What unites all of these artists across the differences in their backgrounds and their music is something that the rock and roll mythology has always obscured. They are working people, or they were before the music changed everything. They came from places where firearms were part of the landscape, where hunting was a practical and cultural tradition, where the ability to take care of yourself was not a political position, but a basic expectation of adult life. The music got bigger, the stages got larger. The money changed everything about the circumstances of their lives. But the relationship with firearms that was built in those early years, in the places they came from, did not go away. It went with them, because it was part of who they were before anyone knew their names. Dave Grohl, who built Foo Fighters into one of the most successful rock bands of the last 30 years after emerging from the wreckage of Nirvana, represents the Pacific Northwest working class tradition in this conversation. Grohl grew up in Springfield, Virginia, and the outdoor culture of the Mid-Atlantic and later the Pacific Northwest shaped a relationship with firearms that reflects the hunting and sporting tradition of those regions. His preference for the Mossberg 500 in various configurations reflects the practical American approach to a shotgun, a tool that does multiple jobs well without pretension or excess. Grohl has spoken about shooting sports as a way of clearing his head in a way that other musicians might talk about running or meditation. A physical discipline with clear and immediate feedback that provides a particular kind of mental reset that is genuinely difficult to replicate through any other activity. The lever-action rifle deserves a specific mention in the context of the classic rock world because it represents a point of intersection between the American West mythology that runs through rock and roll from its earliest years and the practical tradition of American firearms design. The Henry Big Boy in .45 Colt, the Marlin 1895 and .45 70. These are rifles that carry the entire weight of the American frontier in their design, that shoot cartridges developed in the 19th century and still among the most effective deer rounds available, and that appeal powerfully to people who approach equipment with an eye for history and authenticity. Several artists in the classic rock tradition have spoken about lever-action rifles with the same reverence they bring to vintage guitars, recognizing in both the quality of craftsmanship that comes only from designs that have been refined over generations rather than engineered from scratch. The guitar and the gun have always shared the same American mythology: the outlaw, the pioneer, the man or woman who makes their own rules and takes care of their own business. Classic rock understood that mythology and built an entire culture on top of it. These artists did not just play the role, they lived it. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Do it before this ends. This channel is building a body of content that treats firearms, history, and culture with the depth and seriousness that they deserve. And every subscriber is part of making that possible. Share this with every classic rock fan in your life, with everyone who has ever turned up Back in Black or Paradise City and felt something real in it. Tell them the story behind the story. And drop a comment below with the classic rock artist from this era you think we absolutely have to cover next. Be specific. Make your case. The strongest arguments become the next script. And we want to hear from every one of you.